Joining us, of course, again to discuss this is Ross Feingold. Now, this email is the second time that we've seen it be sent off. There was, of course, controversy the first time round and several departments didn't. Is this a continuation and a running theme that you think we will see with the Trump administration and Musk's DOGE really looking at finding why these people should be working and then ultimately trying to cut the fat where they can?
That's right. Elon Musk's portfolio is to reduce the size of the federal government. And frankly, looking at this somewhat from a distance, it's reasonable to ask employees, what have you been up to? What are some of your achievements over the past week? That by itself strikes me as a very reasonable request. And if the cabinet secretaries from the different departments, the equivalent of ministers in other countries, if they object to this and they bring it to the president, I'm not sure they're going to win the argument with President Trump, because President Trump's going to say that I've delegated to Elon Musk to shrink the size of government, to improve government efficiency, and his requests are eminently part of that process, and that would include asking employees what they've been up to. So I think the cabinet secretaries have to be very careful here in their resistance to this request, because I would think it has President Trump's support.
Also joining us to discuss this topic is Hugh Duggan, a former special assistant to President Trump, who's joining us from New York. Thank you very much for being here, Hugh. I want to look at these cuts and where it might get us to. There, of course, has been backlash from Democrats, also backlash from people working in these departments and federal workers who are unsure about their job. But do you think this is the start potentially of one of the biggest shifts we've seen ever potentially in how the US government works?
Yes, hello, thank you. We've seen layoffs in the past. In the Clinton administration, there were thousands of layoffs. It didn't seem to spark the same outrage as this does. I believe this time it's very different because the layoffs and the question about personnel relate more or less to what we've come to know as the deep state in the United States. There's a very strong impression justified by many in the public that indeed our bureaucracy has become almost a fourth branch of government. We have the president, we have the legislature, we have the judiciary, and they're all accountable to the people through vote or some other means. But the bureaucracy has grown. And they are not elected, and they can stay in place forever, and they can remain somewhat anonymous. So I believe the current round of evaluating the bureaucracy and trimming wherever possible is bound to get many bureaucrats very anxious, because I expect that many of them are going to be exposed as being wasteful, as perhaps undermining what the people want and need because they undermine and resist the elected officials of our country. So there's another dynamic at work here separately from one where jobs are lost or where people need to change their career paths. It's one of accountability by this, so to speak, unelected bureaucracy, which is going to be exposed, and it is being exposed every day in new ways.
Yes, staying with you, Hugh, we know, of course, there has been some pushback. There have been several legal filings over these firings and over the actions of Musk's DOGE and also the Trump administration. But a US judge has declared that Trump's firing of the head of the watchdog agency was illegal. Do you think this is going to stop in any way what the Trump administration are looking to do, or might it change the way that they're approaching certain positions and certain people?
Well, I'm sure there will be suits filed, and there have been many suits filed that have not found the president in violation of anything. Those who have something to lose, those that are most anxious about perhaps being exposed politically for doing the will of the bureaucracy instead of the will of the people, those parties are the ones that are raising the loudest noise and creating the most contention to what is mostly the executive's privilege and priority to manage its workforce. So I expect the president will continue and his team realize that they are in fact not just the the chief defense officer of the country, chief commanding officer. They're also the chief bureaucratic officer, and that everyone that works in the agencies under the executive branch do so at the pleasure of the president. He's not going to be deterred by a few judges here and there who perhaps have a finding that is indeed sustainably legal, but I expect the White House will take some of those to the Supreme Court and ask them to interpret more fully whether or not the judiciary process itself may have become a little politicized in finding that the executive might not have authority over his own employees. That seems counterintuitive to most of us here.
Ross, I'd like to come back to you, and I'd like to step away from the political aspect and step away from the legal aspect of this. For the federal workers currently who are doing their job, they may be in a position that's at absolutely no risk, but surely there must be an impact on how people are feeling, not knowing whether they're going to have a job in a week, potentially, in a month, in a year, whether their department's even going to exist in the future. So how can a workforce remain motivated when they're seeing people around them, potentially colleagues or other departments, falling?
Certainly there's the possibility of morale falling during this period of change and a period of frankly, staff redundancies and people being terminated from their jobs. But those of us who've worked in the private sector would consider this very normal. Those of us who've worked in the private sector are used to the ups and downs of the economic cycle. Often we joined a company when times were good, and we might get laid off and made redundant when times are bad. And that's happened a number of times over the recent decades when there's been economic crises, either regional. Here in Asia, we had an Asia financial crisis in 1998. A lot of people were retrenched. That was followed by the dot-com bomb in 2001. And then, of course, there was the global financial crisis of 2007, 2008. So retrenchments, frankly, are just a normal part. Now, civil service employees do have some protections, but this was never meant to be a guarantee of a job through all circumstances, including when the chief executive, the president, decides that the government bureaucracy has become too bloated, which really, frankly, is a serious problem. The growth of government over the past 20, 30 years, it really accelerated after 9/11, specifically with security-related entities, but other parts of the government have continued to grow under both Republican and Democrat presidents. And frankly, I think there's going to be broad support among the populace for retrenching some of the size of the federal government.
Hugh Duggan, coming to you to bring an end to this discussion. Of course, Elon Musk is entrenched in this situation. His leading of the DOGE party has had a massive impact. Do you think there's anything behind that, potentially from Donald Trump, in terms of associating this with Elon Musk? We have spoken about protests today that we've seen outside Tesla stores. There seems to be a divisiveness to Elon Musk and his personality and his character, which some people support, but others don't. Do you think potentially Trump is using Musk as the scapegoat to get this done? Or is this just Elon Musk being a willing disciple almost, who is happy to do whatever his president wants him to?
We've seen a lot of courage over the course of American history by brave people taking on the status quo. Mr. Musk has come forward of his own volition. He's remarkable. He's performed so admirably in so many challenges that he's given himself. This is a challenge that the country's having to take on, and he feels a special responsibility, not just as a major investor here, but in the idea of America, in the idea of freedom, of accountability, which I think is the big word that we're going to have at the top of our mind. Accountability for performance. The government is not performing. We're number 40th in the world in education, but number 1 in spending per pupil. That's just one very sobering statistic, and it's not one Americans are used to hearing. So I believe he's taken this chore at his own behest. As a Minuteman, perhaps in our revolutionary era, we had people who just simply took up their arms and fought against the British. And I believe he's of that spirit and of that ilk. Nobody's using anybody here. The president would proceed just as aggressively. He has this wonderful resource in Mr. Musk and his people to prove even more efficiently the outcomes that he seeks.
Hugh, thank you so much for your insight. Also, thank you to Ross for joining us.